He that letteth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. These words, from the very book that once justified Nathaniel Winter's past actions, would now be the echo of his future. It was a scripture that spoke of justice, of revenge, and of the cyclical nature of violence. For Nathaniel, a man who had spent years burying his past, those words would now guide him back into the very darkness he thought he had left behind. Nathaniel Winters wasn't just a rancher. He was the shepherd, the deadliest killer of the West. Before he had taken on a life of peace, before Sarah and Samuel had entered his world, Nathaniel had executed justice with ruthless precision. His name was feared across the frontier. Men and women alike had heard whispers of him, of the man who brought death with certainty, leaving behind only silence and the scent of blood. But all that had changed. Nathaniel had found something that had eluded him in the years before: a home, a family, a reason to live beyond the gun and the blood. With Sarah, he had built a life that was simple, steady, and full of promise. They had a ranch, just a small plot of land on the edge of Redemption Springs. Sarah, with her calm beauty, had healed Nathaniel's fractured soul, and their son, Samuel, had brought hope into his world again. For 8 years, Nathaniel had thought himself free from the past, convinced that vengeance had no place in the life he was trying to build. But as with all things in the Wild West, peace was fleeting. One evening, a rider came to the ranch, a man Nathaniel had seen only in passing, a member of a local crew. His arrival sent a chill down Nathaniel's spine. Something was wrong. The wind shifted, the air growing colder as the rider dismounted and walked toward him. He was carrying a piece of paper, an urgent message, one that would pull Nathaniel back into the nightmare he thought he had escaped. The rider's words were blunt. "It's them, the Eclipse Riders. They're on their way." Nathaniel stood frozen, his mind racing. Those words weren't just a warning. They were a death sentence. The Eclipse Riders were no ordinary band of outlaws. They were a force of destruction, a crew of men who had caused nothing but chaos and bloodshed wherever they went. And now they were heading for him, bringing with them the weight of his past. The man handed Nathaniel the letter. It was a piece of paper with a Bible verse written on it, Ezekiel 34 verse 10. The passage spoke of the shepherds who failed to protect their flock, of false leaders who led their people to ruin. Nathaniel knew that this was no coincidence. Whoever was leading this gang of riders knew exactly who he was, and they were coming for him. Before Nathaniel could respond, the rider mounted his horse again, urgency in his every movement. "They're moving fast," he said. "You need to leave now." Nathaniel's heart raced, but his mind remained calm, calculating. He had to act quickly. The quiet, peaceful life he had built for Sarah and Samuel was now at risk. But that wasn't what tore at him the most. What truly devastated him was the thought of losing them, of being too late to protect the very people who had shown him what it meant to live beyond the violence. As the rider galloped off into the distance, Nathaniel rushed inside the house, his movements frantic. His hand trembled slightly as he packed what he needed, the essentials for a journey that might end in bloodshed. His spare revolver, a canteen of water, ammunition, and from beneath the floorboards he retrieved the old Bible, the one that had been with him during his days as the shepherd, the one that contained the names of those he had killed in the name of justice. But now, it wasn't justice that he sought. Nathaniel stood still for a moment, holding the Bible in his hands. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even, but its presence now felt different. He had used this book for years to justify his actions, to guide his hand as he passed judgment on those deemed unworthy of life. But now, as he stood at the threshold of a new chapter in his life, Nathaniel wondered if this was truly the path he needed to follow. The Bible had been his compass, his guide, but now it seemed like a burden. He closed it with a decisive snap, tucking it into his saddlebag. He had made his choice. The farm was silent as he made his way to the barn, where Sarah and Samuel had been preparing for the night. The air was heavy with the scent of burning wood from the barn, still smoldering from an earlier fire. Nathaniel paused, his heart heavy, knowing that whatever came next, This would be the final stand for everything he had ever known. The Eclipse riders arrived before dawn. It wasn't long before Nathaniel saw them. The 8 riders, dark figures silhouetted against the rising sun. They approached quickly, moving with military precision. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the property, watching as they circled the barn. The leader, a tall man with a weathered face and a scar across his jaw, dismounted and approached him. Nathaniel's hand instinctively went to the grip of his revolver, but he didn't draw it. The man smiled coldly, recognizing Nathaniel instantly. "You've been hiding long enough, Winters," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The shepherd's time is over." Nathaniel's breath caught. He knew that voice. The leader was none other than Mason Holloway, the son of the man Nathaniel had killed years ago, a man who had served as a spiritual guide to soldiers on both sides of the war. Nathaniel had executed Reverend Holloway based on what he believed to be a legitimate accusation of treason. But now, looking at Mason, Nathaniel saw the same fury in his eyes, the same burning desire for vengeance. "I killed your father," Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You want justice, you want revenge. But this," he gestured toward his farm, the land he had fought so hard to protect. "This is not justice. This is a blood feud that will never end." Mason's smile turned to a snarl. "You think you can just walk away from past, Winters? You destroyed my family. Now, it's time for you to pay." In that moment, Nathaniel realized that there would be no escaping his past, no running from the violence that had shaped him. The same violence that had turned him into the man he was today. But as he looked at Sarah and Samuel, standing together on the porch, their faces filled with hope, Nathaniel knew that he couldn't keep running. He had to face it head on. The final showdown was swift, but brutal. Guns were drawn, shots rang out. Nathaniel fought like a man possessed, his every movement calculated and precise, driven by the same cold resolve that had once defined a shepherd. But this time it wasn't just about death. As the last of the riders fell, Nathaniel stood amidst the smoke and dust, his heart heavy but resolute. He had done what was necessary, what had to be done. But in the silence that followed, the realization hit him. Vengeance had not brought peace. It had only left more blood in its wake. Nathaniel walked back to his home, to the graveyard where Sarah and Samuel lay. He knelt beside them, the weight of the Bible in his hands. This time, he didn't open it to the pages of judgment. Instead, he simply placed it on their graves. A time for vengeance and a time for mercy. Nathaniel whispered, the words of Revelation 13 verse 10, now feeling like a burden he could no longer bear. This was the time for something else. The time for healing.